contacts. Well, I really appreciate all of you being here. Yeah, this is pretty freaking special. Yeah, I've got family. Got a family sitting right here who hosted me when I was an intern at Sports Spectrum. Really brought me down to Charlotte. Got my Sports Spectrum family back here. And then my Watershed people and so many people who I've mysteriously connected with along the way. So this is really, really exciting. Appreciate all of you coming out. So this is the final stop on the tour. We've been in Indianapolis on Tuesday, then Fort Wayne on Wednesday, and then say Friday. Okay, Nashville Thursday, and then so this is the final stop. But it's been fun. It's been really fun, and this is the book. This is Where the Colors Blend. And I just wanted to prepare a little talk because I just really appreciate all of you coming out. So I'm probably going to wander all over the place, just like this book wanders all over the place. But I at least wanted to give you, at least you can see I'm giving you my energy of something of a talk. And that's my gratitude to you for coming out. First off, I already thanked a few people. Twyla and Charlie Briscoe are here. They are the reasons behind this book, really. So just kind of before I get into the talk, just kind of the preface of the book is that right when I graduated from Grace College, I moved down to Charlotte, and my old mentor, Coach Chad Briscoe, the athletic director at Grace, he invited me to a church softball tournament in Roanoke, Virginia. And he said, "You should come on up. There's a lot of stories here. Maybe you can do a book about it." And I was like, that's kind of weird. I don't think I'm going to write a book about a church softball tournament. But I got up there, and turns out this tournament had been going on for 40 years. It was founded by Charlie and Twyla Briscoe. Now Chad, their son, runs the tournament. And it raises funds for mission work in Paraguay. And in that space, I just saw vulnerable, unashamed people who were connecting with each other on a very deep level. And I got addicted to it. So I started going back every year, going to the tournament, gathering stories. In 2012, I interviewed one of the missionaries who the tournament benefits, Marcos Curley. He had just moved to the capital of Asuncion in Paraguay with $200 in his pocket. Brought his family with $200. Then in 2013, I interviewed Norberto Curley, his brother, and a year before, he had lost his wife and only son in a car accident. And I spent the whole weekend with him. And so these are the kind of stories that, what I found is that these stories were meeting me right where I was at. And through this beautiful exchange of stories, which I was taking part in just as a journalist, as a storyteller, I was finding healing as they told me their stories, as they opened up to me about their own grief, about their own struggles. Because this was a time in my life, and still is in some ways, the same time in my life, where I just had a lot of doubts about my faith. A lot of toxic things in my spirituality were, I was pretty much having an identity crisis at like 23, which is fun. And these stories met me where I was at, and Roanoke became a retreat for me to really actually slow down, process, to be, and through the avenue of telling stories, to heal on my own. So tonight I wanted to talk about one of the themes from the book, and that is your spiritual and psychological starting place. So again, I'm just going to wander everywhere here, but it's all coming back to that. So you can tune out if you want, that's fine, but pick up at any story, it's all going to come back to that. So for me, well, even just generally, one of my favorite writers, Richard Rohr, he writes about how it's been proven through neuroscience that the brain has a negative bias, that we automatically cling to uncertainty, unknowing, negativity. I go to sleep thinking about that email that I received that just tore me up 2 weeks before. So Richard Rohr writes that it takes 8 to 12 seconds or something like that to savor a positive thought for it to leave a unique positive imprint on your brain. So I say that because most of us start from a place of lack psychologically. Most of us wake up thinking about how we're not enough, or how we for me, I went about my day trying to prove my enoughness, trying to prove that I was loved. And for me, this was even more complicated because of my spirituality. I always felt like I was on a performance treadmill as it pertained to God, as it pertained to my relationship with God. And I write in the book how I felt like I was running as hard and as fast as I could on this treadmill and going nowhere at all. Trying to get close to God, but going nowhere. I was nailing my devotionals, I was doing this, I was doing that, I was reading, I was praying, whatever it may be. And I just wasn't going anywhere. And what's even more messed up is that I felt like God was controlling the treadmill, turning up the dial, never letting me off, never letting me rest, never letting me enter into a state of peace. And the conclusion always was me sliding off the freaking thing, looking up at God from this puddle of shame and sweat and exhaustion, and just saying, will you forgive me? And that's a really unhealthy spiritual starting place. That's where I was at. So there was a transition that took place in about 2013, right before I interviewed Norberto, actually. And I met a guy named Dave Hickman, who's sitting right over here, handsome, bearded fella. And we mysteriously connected. I was walking through a coffee shop in South End, and Dave really introduced me to the idea of, if the human experience was kind of comprised in 3 elements, he said that the core of who you are, if you picture a target, and Dave, just call me out if this is bullshit and fill things in, because you're the brilliant person here. But he said that the human experience is, comprised into a target. At the very core, that's your spirit, and that's the truest thing about you. And then outside of that, that's your soul. And this is where your mind, your intellect, your emotions, your ego, good things, but also things that have to be navigated. That's in this outer target of the soul. And then it's your body. But the starting place of spirit, of capital L, love, animating you outward through every single aspect of your being, that gave me a different starting place. And that was very beneficial to me. So this kind of dives into I still can't find it. Here it is. And Dave wrote the foreword, by the way, too. So really appreciate you doing that. But so this is very Christian language, because that is where a lot of my scars were. So I think a lot of times we have to go back to the place where the pain is and use some of that same language to redeem that pain. And that's kind of, you'll see this here. But I think that this could be applicable to a wide variety of people, even if you don't have Christian scars. So,
What page are you on?
115.
You got your book, you can follow
Yeah,
along.
if you want to follow along. Man, you're always a step ahead of me. Thanks, Charlie.
Sell the books, dude.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with a scripture, and this is from John 17. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I've given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. So when I first read that, I was like, was Jesus on LSD? Or like, he's talking about this strange interconnectedness of all humanity, and God's in me and they're in us, and it's this beautiful unconditional circle dance that we're being invited into. So now this dives in to a new starting place. Never had I tasted the beauty of such love and grace, not before exploring the theology of union, the mystery of oneness with God, which, though impossible to put fully into words, is to me allowing myself to engage in John 17 experientially, trusting that I am being animated in and through by something that is bigger than myself, the author of love, the creator of life, that there's a mysterious depth to reality and to my very being, that perhaps there's an interconnectedness of all things that reflects this boundless love and grace. I've heard it said that no mystic would ever claim to be one with God, and neither do I, but that is because I've tasted of something that I must endlessly explore. No matter, my starting place is one of indwelling love, union, and therefore, to hate myself is to hate God. To give in to shame is to arrogantly say that God's love and grace isn't big enough. There wasn't a single part of my being that was inherently bad, not with spirit at my core. Did my body, my flesh, have unhealthy cravings? Yes, of course, but my body also allowed me to dance and to hug a hurting friend and to sprint into the ocean. Did my soul, my heart, my mind, my emotions and intellect have blind spots? Yes, of course, but my soul also allowed me to cry with someone who is suffering and to get lost in a good book and to examine my life. My spirit wanted to gently infiltrate every single aspect of my being. Christianity, of all things, which oftentimes felt to be the cause of my shame, was suddenly inviting me to leave my rigid biblical code behind, along with all my idolatrous formulas, and simply experience the mystery and wonder and beauty of God's love, which is capital L life. God went from being way out there to living within me and through me, every second of every day. For this is the message of Emmanuel, Christ with us, and of the advocate, Christ in us, a gift that Christ said was somehow even more valuable to his disciples than his bodily presence. How had I missed all of this in my theology? God had always been there within me, but I had never been aware of what was already true. Now this seems to be the great spiritual journey for me, not exhausting myself arriving at some place, but instead opening my eyes to what already is. It was as if in my theological foundation of total depravity and corruption, I could not possibly comprehend that the God of the universe would want to live within me. For I was just a sinner in the hands of an angry God, an insect dangling on a slender thread over a fire, as Jonathan Edwards, a minister in the 1700s, once said. Yeah, I remember reading that. That passage haunted the crap out of me, and it should. That's a bad starting place. I'd always told myself that I was worthless, prone to sin, incapable of doing any good, but the mystery of union gave me worth, because by God's indwelling, there is a spring of unfathomable grace, an inner river. When you stare into the gentle eyes of an infant child, is it like looking into the eyes of a sinner or into the eyes of God? It was God's breath in the Genesis poem that made Adam a living being, and the same was true with me. Spirit, the breath of the divine, was at my core, which meant that, even though the world might be broken, love was the truest thing about me. Who am I, wrote the late monk and author Thomas Merton. I am one loved by Christ. So, that did not resonate overnight. And I think I've got a pretty good parable to show you how this kind of permeated. This parable's for you, Nolan. Nolan,
Is there a punchline?
there's a punchline. So this is from one of my favorite living authors, Irish philosopher named Peter Rollins. And he tells this parable about a guy who, for some reason, just thought he was a seed. You know, like a seed that you plant a tree with, or plants, or animals eat. And this man had to undergo intense psychoanalysis because he thought he was a seed. I love this parable. So after undergoing psychoanalysis, the man finally becomes convinced that he's not a seed. The man returns to his home, little farmhouse, animals all around, and within being at his house for maybe 30 minutes or so, he ends up sprinting back to the psychoanalyst, banging on his door, having a nervous breakdown. And the psychoanalyst says, "What happened? You know you're not a seed." And the man says, "I know that, but do the chickens know?" So, with this starting place that Dave introduced to me, I knew that I was the beloved. I believed that. I believed that was my starting place. And yet, whenever I experienced frustration in my career, whenever I found a typo in my work, whenever I got that email, whenever I would read through a sentence like I did just now and found something that I could have phrased differently, my belovedness was on trial. Whenever I experienced rejection or betrayal, my belovedness was on trial. And going back to the target, the illustration, if I could paint, I would love to paint this, but if at the core of who you are, I would just like to paint just pure and utter light coming from the core. And then in the soul, I would love to just draw or paint this intricate castle. And in some of these rooms are dark, some are filled with light. And allowing belovedness to permeate through every single corner of the soul, for me, meant going into these dark rooms, going into these forlorn hallways, exploring these cobweb corners, rooms I hadn't been in for a while. But the room was daring me to let my own belovedness, what was already true, enter into that space. So that was a different starting place for me. And that's been my spiritual journey since then. And by the way, if your spirituality right now works for you, then I'm not out to change that. You know, I needed to get away from the God of certainty and into a God of union. Because I doubted my own self-worth, because I judged myself so hard in my previous spiritual paradigm, I also judged others. I think for me, I treated, even if I didn't say it out loud, I was treating others the way I treated myself. And this gave me a new starting place. So I'm going to look through this. These are my notes from the last 3 days. Kind of faded and crinkled. But I know I'm going to get mad at myself if I leave something out.
You're loved anyway, Stephen.
What was that?
You're loved anyway, it's okay.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, see? All right, I'll just leave them. Oh, yeah. I got to talk about this. Okay. So, Peter Rollins, again, not a parable this time, thank God. But he writes about how in good child development, a good parent will first convince the child that the child belongs. And then from there it moves to behavior. And then from there it moves to belief. But no matter the belief or the behavior, the child knows that his loving parents or her loving parents accept him or her for who they are. And I think you see this in parables in the Bible, like parable of the prodigal son, where the father pursues both the self-righteous son and the prodigal son with the same intensity and meets them right where they're at. But then Rollins says that the church has interestingly gone the opposite way, generally speaking, where they've started with belief, pray this prayer, go to the altar, get confirmed, do this, do that, and then they focus on behavior. Stop doing this, get you involved in that. And then once you're the same freaking person as everyone else, then you belong. So I just wonder what it would look like if we started with belonging and allowed diversity of thought to naturally unfold through this space of what's already true about each and every person. And where I wanted to end tonight, and I hope it's relevant for today, out of this space of belonging, out of this space of what is already true, because my own self-view, my own self-worth had been reformed, as I mentioned earlier, it helped me to view others the same way I was viewing myself, that there was a light glowing through, even if they're completely different than me. And Thomas Merton, definitely my favorite author, he writes about, he had a mystical moment on the corner of 4th and Walnut in downtown Louisville, where and Merton is a Trappist monk. I think he died in the early or late 1960s, and so as a monk, he's obviously trapped behind those abbey walls most of the time. But for whatever reason, I guess the monks decided to go out that night, and they went to downtown Louisville. I have no idea why they're down there, but they're down there. And he says that as he was on the corner of 4th and Walnut, he saw everyone walking by him, walking past him, and he said it was as if he could see each person for who they really are at the core of their beings. And he said that it was as if they were each shining like the sun. And then he says these really provocative words, which I've really grown to love. And he says something along the lines of, if we could all just see each other as we really are, I suppose the real problem would be is that we would fall down and worship each other. And I just think that's relevant for the divisiveness today and the polarization today. What would it look like to all go to the border, for every American to go to the border and worship the living and suffering Christ in the caravan? What would it look like for Democrats and Republicans to worship what's already true in the party they disagree with the most? To validate the person's worth. Because here's the thing, once you enter into the beauty of someone else, you can disagree. But it doesn't matter all that much anymore because you're exchanging stories. It's back to this book. You become vulnerable and you're engaged in the beautiful exchange of stories. Then you walk out of a bar and it's like, so we still disagree, right? Yeah, we still disagree, but thanks for sharing your story. I love you. I needed that. That helps me. So I wanted to end on reading the last section of the last chapter of this book. This one should not take me as long to find. So this takes place, so this unfolds over a period of 7 years. And in the final year, the Briscoes and their son Chad allowed me to go to Paraguay to actually be in these stories that I had been gathering for over a half decade. And we hung out with Marcus, Norberto. It was just a beautiful time. And the last chapter, the last section, it takes place when I am on a bus on the final night in Paraguay, and we're riding back to the capital of Asuncion. And this is on page 263. And before I start, one more thing. So the interesting thing about that week was that it was Paraguay's Independence Day. And on the day that I'm writing this, or journaling, it was their Independence Day. And Paraguay has the same national colors on their flag as we do on ours. So I'm sitting on this bus, and this is kind of what happens. I'm sitting in an aisle seat. Next to me is a stout Guarani mother in a bright pink shirt, making the journey to the capital with 2 of her children on her lap. An infant boy with damp black curly hair, and a girl who must have been 5 or 6 or 10. I just have no idea where children are. But she has a laugh that sounds like music. Coach Briscoe gave them a Cliff Bar. I guess I thought that was important to write too. No idea why. I keep looking out the window at the splendor of the countryside off of Highway 7. And this was is this the same highway that Norberto had his wreck?
Going into Asuncion, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
I keep looking out the window at the splendor of the countryside off of Highway 7. The kaleidoscope of dark green flatlands, bronze brushlands, the light blue sky, and the dark shadows of distant trees, and smiling at the mother and her children next to me. What a beautiful country with such beautiful people. I cannot believe this trip has already come to an end. I do not want it to come to an end. I do not want to return to the chaos, the projections, the perceptions, the rat race, the drama, the dreams that taunt me throughout the day and wake me from my sleep. But I must return. You cannot run from your problems. You must live amongst them, befriend them. Scooting toward the aisle to my left, I pat the space between me and the mother to my right, offering the little girl a place to sit. This is a 6-hour bus ride after all, a long time for this mother to have 2 children in her arms. The mother smiles, but the girl remains on her lap. Maybe they are already as comfortable as they can possibly be, close to one another. The sun is setting outside our window. I am in a reflective state this evening, thinking about the trip and all that has been revealed to me. The main thing that keeps rising to the forefront of my mind is how interesting it was to spend this particular week in Paraguay, leading up to the People's Independence Day, which is today. Each town and city we visited seemed to be clothed in red, white, and blue. People walking around selling flags, banners slouched above those red clay streets, light poles wrapped in ribbon. It felt like we were back in America, a deep yet plain reminder perhaps that we are all more alike than we have ever dared to imagine. Here I am, next to this middle Guarani woman with 2 children on her lap, someone who lives a world away from my home in America, someone who speaks an entirely different language than me, someone who has an entirely different background. And just as our countries share the same colors in their flags, we are also the same at the core of our beings, where the breath of the divine resides, and also the same in our identities, wrapped in the reality of belovedness. We are on a bus together, going to the same place, looking at the same sunset, and perhaps the place is more than a bus station, and maybe the sunset is more than this world. Then, staring out the window with this mother whom I do not even know, her son cradled in her right arm, her daughter nestled in her left arm, both of them asleep, I see it, spelled out across the expanse, a violet sky, the red embers of the sun mixing with the whites of the clouds, mixing with the blues of the heavens, the blending of our country's colors, oneness, union, fullness. We are all so different, yet mysteriously the same, mystically united. My spirit breathes and glows. My soul ventures out into the field and covers my dreams with the clay. My body falls asleep. Really appreciate all of you being here. So, the Briscoe coach, Chad, Charlie, and Twyla, they provided posters for free. You can pick them up out back. Books are also for sale. And does anyone have a time?
No.
Nope. Beats.
It's 8:16.
8:16.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we can go 15, 20 minutes of a Q&A if anyone has any questions about, Lord knows I need to clarify things more. I speak in metaphor and symbol most of the time. So if you have any questions about what I talked about or the book or the writing process, anything like that, I'm happy to answer some questions. And yeah, but again, I just really appreciate all of you being here. So.
Stephen, I want to make a comment. In the fall of 1962, when Tabitha and I were at Anderson University together, we both had come from such different backgrounds. I had come from a mountain in West Virginia. She had come from mountains in Brazil. And the day we met, it was as if we had known each other for a lifetime.
Yep.
No, just like sisters, never. And through the years, if we were apart as we are many times, you come back together and it's as if you've not missed a beat. If you've read Thoreau's book, and understand that. But in Tabitha's statement to me this year, after she read the book, she said, it was always my hope and prayer that everything in my life, every path I chose, every person whose soul I engaged with, that somehow their journey and my journey would come to the same path, which is exactly what you said in a different way. But I'm thinking that 60 years ago, you had 2 girls feeling the same thing you felt and are saying here, which only says to me that life is really no different at any point until we come to the point that you have come, and that is you understand who you are in Christ and the beauty that every person on this earth that walks this earth, wherever they are, if they truly are a seeker, they're going to come to this point, perhaps not with the eloquence of your expression, but with the humility of a broken heart, which is often the place that we end up when we're truly seeking. But you've done such a beautiful job, and to hear Tabitha's words ring in my head just is haunting to me, because it's the same words that she spoke many years ago about her life coming out of a jungle, and she was the child of missionaries. Her parents were Ohio corn farm kids that felt the call to the mission field, and Tabitha was born in Brazil, and yet she carried with her, and does to this day, such an intensity for bringing young people into this path.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
I hope you understand that.
Yeah, so Tabitha and Twyla, they roomed together at Anderson College then.
Yes.
Anderson College. And Tabitha is the mother of Marcos and Norberto, who I mentioned earlier. So this whole thing started, this connection between two countries and two families started because of this incredible woman right here.
Well,
And
was the
Tabitha and the
incredible
interconnectedness
precious.
of, yeah. So, thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stephen, I was gonna ask you, as a mom, and I've met your parents,
Mhm.
I wonder what kind of conversations you had along the way or have now that the book is out about their memories of you as a kid and how you got to such an odd starting place. I mean, does it,
Yeah.
you know, I'm thinking about it, I was like, does this bother them that like, oh dear, what did we do to him? Or, I mean, I'm sure you have
Yeah.
had that conversation.
Yeah, so. in
And
the-
if it's too personal, that's okay.
No,
but.
no, I'm an open book. Like actually I'm not afraid of a lot of people reading this thing, but you're going to see how messed up, like, not messed up, just
No.
I think about things all the time, and I go deep into those things, and anyway, it all goes back to the same place, I think. But yeah, I write in the book that I was raised in a loving and accepting family who let me know that I was loved despite my performance, but God hijacked that identity. Of course, it wasn't God as my perception of God, but it was spirituality. Not spirituality, it was rigid religion that got me onto the performance treadmill.
Because
So-
of your personality bent or just.
Yeah, there were like the Jonathan Edwards. Like I remember reading that sermon in college, and that thing haunted me. So I think I kind of hold both in the same. Like Grace College sent me on like the best journey of my life intellectually, but at the same time, like anyone going to any school, you're just exposed to a wide range of things. And I think because of my performance-driven personality, which I think is a lot of us in the West, like we're set up to be performance-driven. Like you go out, you get the American dream. You have to work hard. If you don't work hard, then you're not going to get it. You have your to-do list, and if you don't check off everything on your to-do list, then I go to bed a little bit less at peace at night. But yeah, I think it was because of these bents in my person, and probably being an artist too. Like my therapist isn't here tonight. It's probably a good thing because he'd probably just be taking notes the whole time. But I went to therapy for my perfectionism, and it was again going into that room and believing that I was the beloved, even in the space where I'm most critical of myself. Henry Nouwen has a great quote. He says that in his book Life of the Beloved, he says, I kept running around it in large or small circles, looking for someone or something to convince me that I was the beloved. And that was very much my life, I think. So I'm not sure how I got there. I think it was just probably a combination of a lot of things. You know, certain theology my personality kind of clung to, along with being in a kind of artistic sphere where perfection, where your own work haunts you. So I've had to learn how to navigate that. But yeah, great question.
The
Do you know your
scripture comes
Enneagram
back.
number?
I'm a 4-wing 5.
Okay. I would have said 4-2, yeah.
Yeah.
The scripture comes back to labor and enter into his rest. And that's where true love and compassion meet head on.
Mhm.
When we can walk away from our labor and step into his rest.
Yeah.
And that's where you're headed.
Yeah. The big spiritual transition for me was from this reckless doing to being.
Yes.
Dave once told me that growing spiritually is a lot like getting a tan. Working on your tan. Okay.
That's good.
You go outside, you position yourself beneath the sun, and you rest, and you just enjoy the rays. And you sip a good birdsong beer while you're at it. You know, but it's completely contradictory to our whole Western paradigm of going. It's like, no, you have nothing to prove. You're the beloved. Let that permeate through everything. So,
I have a question for you, Steve.
Yep.
What was your breaking point, like, as far as wanting to write this kind of book in your religion, and what kind of brought you to that point of, like, okay, something needs to change?
yeah, great question. Gee, you all are bringing it. I was just miserable being a Christian, honestly, because the performance treadmill is miserable. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I think I got to the point where, because with my religious background, you are set up to believe that somehow you have absolute truth, and that everyone else is wrong, and that you have it somehow, and everyone else is lost. And yet, I had it, and yet I was just freaking miserable. And yet, I was going out and judging others, even if I didn't say it, it was in my head, critiquing people's theology, critiquing people's politics, whatever it may be, thinking that I could get them. I mean, that people were projects. I had agendas. I didn't like living that way socially either. So on a personal level, I was miserable, filled with shame. And then on a social level, I did not like the arrogance that I brought into relationships. And ignorance. Not just arrogance, but just ignorance, because I wasn't curious. Because I didn't have a good starting point. So with this new starting point, not only has it birthed within me a curiosity and a non-judgmental posture toward myself as I explore the hallways and the rooms in my interior castle, leaving shame and being ultra-critical far behind. It's also birthed within me a curiosity and non-judgmentalism and an exploratory desire to engage in people's stories who are most different than me. Because my own salvation and awakening, for me, has been found in the person who's most different than me, not around people who are exactly the same as me. You know? And I think we see that on social media too. Like, it's just an echo chamber a lot of times. You know, you just flip through your feed and it's just an echo chamber of people who are just regurgitating the exact same thing as you. So now when I hear something that's disruptive, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where that comes from. Maybe that comes from a story that I have the opportunity as the beloved to explore someone else's belovedness. Like, that's an unfathomable depth. That's the person shining like the sun that Merton talks about, I think. So, but yeah, I mean, it was just exhaustion, shame on a personal level. And I didn't like the posture I was bringing into relationships, you know? And it all came from my spirituality, which for me, that's played out through finding healing in that same spirituality, finding a different way. So, yeah, it's a good question too. I kind of want to just close things down now because no, these are good. No, these are really good.
Hey, Stephen, in the first chapter, so the very last part of the poem that you had written kind of really struck me. Would you mind reciting it and then telling us, on the last portion you talk about, and I have it already for you.
Oh, cool.
And you had mentioned talking about searching for your name. I'd like to get your input on, dive a little bit deeper into that.
Cool.
Have you found that name?
Ooh. I'm going to read this really slow as I think about it. Alone. but alive. Is this drive? I won't do that. Alone but alive. Is this drive the prelude to my life? Paramount views, joy in the journey, an empty passenger seat beside me, reminding me of the route I chose, hoping to God I'm not my own, for such futility would leave me empty. Whatever guilt I feel for leaving, whatever song that change might sing, for my brother or for her, for friendship or for love, the blame is mine. But if all runs dry like Carolina in July, I would not change a thing. For if I'm free, I must wander, to meander through meaning and to make mistakes while dreaming is living. A journey unpredictable, the narrative of change, when I loved and left for life again, searching for my name. Yeah, so I wrote this right when I moved down to Charlotte and I was leaving my home in Indiana behind. So that's kind of where that comes from. But it was even with like my rigid, toxic spirituality, I think we all know this, that like I knew there was something true within me. Like I knew there was something animating me, even if I couldn't find the words for it. And I just knew that I was being pulled down to Charlotte by something mysterious. Like I think we all know that at the core is something good. Like a lot of my friends have kids now, and I've never had a conversation with one of my friends right after, let's say he held his newborn son, and he said like, yeah, little Anthony is good, but he's such a sinner. I looked into his eyes and all I saw was just sinner. It's like, no, like I was holding little Anthony and it was like looking into the eyes of God. So like I think we all know there's something true within each person, and that's kind of where this came from, where I was being moved and compelled by something true, and it was pulling me into a place where it's cool being here in Charlotte because this is where I really found myself, and went on that discovery and stepped into something that was more mystery rooted, holistic, inclusive, where there's freedom. Have I found my name? Oh gosh. I wrote in the book somewhere that I feel like I said something along the lines of, I feel that I've arrived, or I don't feel like I've arrived, but I feel like I'm perpetually tasting of something of my arrival. I am in transit, yet at the same time already home. So it's kind of this paradox tension that I feel like probably going back to the Enneagram, being a 4-wing 5, where I get back to longing a lot. And I think there's something missing. And I think that, and a lot of times that's just my ego, getting me back to a place that's comfortable so I don't have to enter into vulnerability and intimacy. Yeah, but as a 4, it feels really true because it is, anyone fan of the Enneagram? Okay. All right. I won't go too deep into this, but
I'm feeling
that's all I needed. I just need to.
Amen, brother. Amen.
But yeah, but it's in that tension of like navigating my ego and my unhealthy tendencies, yet at the same time allowing myself to feel deeply and be compelled by something that's true within me, something that's animating me. Yeah, so.
I think when you lose that longing, you're done.
Yeah,
You need
exactly.
that all your life
Yeah,
to some
yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
Ms. Twyla, you had mentioned a while ago that seeker in us all, right? So,
Yeah.
which I saw in you the moment we met.
Yeah.
So,
And that's thanks, man. Yeah. But I think that's what the theology of union gave to me, was something that I could endlessly explore. You know, belovedness is always going to be permeating through my interior castle, as long as I don't get back into my ultra-critical, judgmental self. You know, and even then it'll probably keep permeating because it's true. But yeah, like whenever Dave introduced me to this idea of being one with Christ, being one with capital L love, and that bringing you to life and pulling you, and use whatever words you want for it. You know, like, as someone who some have called me like a Christian mystic or something. Like, I know words fall short. They're mere attempts, you know. It's like they're just mere attempts to explain the unfathomable. But I feel like I could just keep trying to explain union with God for the rest of my life. You know? In transit, yet at the same time already home. So I guess I haven't found my name, but I have found my name.
This is what young people of your age need to hear, son. They need this. We don't need these rigid walls that block us out, and unless this generation picks this up, experiences it, and moves out with it, we're in sad shape.
Steve,
Yes.
first off, fantastic work. Super proud of you,
Yes.
man. Are there any projects on the horizon that you're really excited about moving forward?
So this is this is my. I asked him to ask that question.
Did not sound authentic.
But so first off, it's weird giving a talk in front of this guy because I lived with him for 4 years, and his fingerprints are all over this thing. Like, he saw me at my worst. He saw me beating myself up. He saw me coming home late at night, rejuvenated from a talk with Dave Hickman. You know. But I did want you to ask that question because there's someone very special sitting in the far right-hand corner, and this is Nick Karras. And he is the former owner of the Double Door Inn. So, kind of a story behind this, and this ties back to the talk, but in 2016, I was super aggravated with my inability to get this thing published. And I was getting rejection letters from agents and rejection letters from publishers. And I reached out to Paul Young, author of The Shack, on LinkedIn, of all places. And I thought that maybe he could connect me with an agent because we're both kind of in the mystical vein. No matter how you feel about his theology, like, he inspires the Christian imagination, and he's brilliant at that. So I was like, oh, maybe you can connect me with an agent or a publisher, very idealistic. And what he told me on the phone was not that at all. And he said, listen, I wrote The Shack for my kids because we couldn't afford Christmas presents. So my wife wanted me to write a project for my kids and to share everything that I'd learned. And it just happened to sell 20 million copies. But he told me, he was like, we're all in the river of God's love and affection and grace already. We're already there, back to the starting place. And yet most of us are looking for a dock to cling to or a boat to hop onto so that we can control the direction. So the way I heard that was him essentially telling me, you have to just keep writing, man. Like, I can tell, like, he could hear, I know he could hear, like, the passion in my voice, that these stories compelled me, and they helped me. So I got this book done, and then at the beginning of 2016, and all along, Paul's conversation was just kind of ringing in my head, like, just stick to what's true. Stay in the river of God's love and affection. And for me, that meant continue creating. So in 2016, beginning of 2016, I found out that the Double Door Inn was closing. The Double Door Inn, oldest blues venue in east of the Mississippi.
Possibly.
Okay. Nick's one of the most humble guys I've ever met. Every time I went to the Double Door Inn, which interestingly Dave introduced me to, it was a space where I just felt absolutely alive. It was a diverse space. It was a space where all ages, all races, all sexuality just came in, danced, drank, had a good time, entered into the river, and just enjoyed it. Left all ego projections, left it all behind. And the Double Door Inn became very much a reflection of the circle dance I was talking about earlier, entering into what's already true. And and the Double Door Inn was that sanctuary for me. So all of 2016, after this book was already done, I worked on a book about the Double Door Inn. It's called Knights of the Double Door Inn. And I interviewed people there closely associated with the Double Door Inn, and just interviewed them about grief, transition, really tapping into the things that all of us go through. But it was all being played out in this space that was the Double Door Inn. So I definitely wanted to talk about that tonight with Nick being here. But that book's done, and every time I sat down to work on that book, going back to my talk, it was as if I feel like I was just telling God that I'm daring to believe that I am the beloved. Because I hadn't seen any fruit from this yet. And I felt insane for writing this thing when I had no fruit to show from my labor, from my performance. But I knew there's something true within me. So the only solution was to keep writing. And every time I sat down at the keyboard, I feel like that was me experientially saying, I'm daring to believe that I'm the beloved in this avenue of creativity when my enoughness is on trial the most. So, but yeah, thanks for asking that question I asked you to ask.
Who's going to publish it?
No idea. Yeah. No publisher yet for that one. So we'll see how that unfolds. But. Anyone else? Thank you all so much for being here. It's truly humbling. I'm not a speaker, I'm a writer, so I appreciate you kind of sitting through all my ramblings there, and maybe you took something that's somewhat useful, but I'm just so thankful all of you are here tonight. So books are in the back, free posters in the back, and then I guess I'll sell some books, but the value goes down significantly with the signature. So I texted that to my friend the other day, and he said, "What, you think I'm really going to resell this piece of crap?" It's like, all right, good. But thank you. Thank you so much.